we are now going to look at the literature, poetry, and cultural references from episodes 1 to 14. And we know that it can get lost in translation, a lot of idioms. And it would be really nice to actually understand a bit more of the cultural references and the poetry lyrical waxing that comes into this, because I feel like it would change a lot of our perception and ideas of what was being said, because clearly there are going to be a lot of cultural references that I don't get and a lot of you didn't get. So it'd be really nice to see what it actually meant and what was behind it. And as she says right here, this is her first video. For some reason, I'm always starting on someone's not their first video. And I am looking forward to what she will explain, because I think it again will open my eyes to just a lot of, especially the references, the cultural aspects of it. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share.
This is my first video, and there will be more on word of honors, literature, poetry, folk culture references to allow the two male leads to flirt under
Under
broad
broad
daylight.
daylight, they did flirt.
In this video, we're going to cover episode 1 to episode 14, the stuff that I've noticed.
It's actually quite a
stuff that's
small amount
worth
she
talking
covers,
about,
if you
because
think
this
about
drama is
it.
set in a fictional time. So you can't quite tell what is the specific dynasty the characters are living in. They're referring to literature that comes from all times. Wen
Because it could be
Kexing, as
quite
a
wide,
character
a
written
spectrum.
in the drama version, he's a very heavy poetry user. So he tends to recite a poem before he starts to talk about something. The poem doesn't have to be directly flirtatious or really referring to anything
It's just
specifically.
the
It may just be
character is.
describing what condition they're under or what is the physical space they're in. For example, if he's by a river, he talks about a poem that's referring to something, river, water, that's not necessarily connected to anything apart from show off that he's well educated. I think this is
That
very
he came
interesting
from
for the
Stop.
writer to add that in, because this is a character who had a really bad childhood and he probably didn't get well educated by his parents. And sometimes
No, he
when
was
people
educated
don't
by
have
someone
something,
else.
they would revengefully try to get more of that. So I can totally see, as he grows up on his own, he taught himself. And there's definitely an overcompensation going on with that, which results in him really liking
Showing
to
off,
show
yeah,
off
but that
his
makes perfect
richer
sense with
knowledge.
his
Early on in
childhood.
episode 2, when he tried to convince Zhou Zishu, taking the same ferry as he does, to go to Jinghu Shanzhuang, the Mirror Lake Manor, he said 2 lines from a poem to send Zhou Zishu off. 但度无所苦，我自迎接汝. It's not a very famous poem. You do have to Google it. This poem is written in Dongjing, Eastern Jin Dynasty, by Wang Xianzhi. He had a very adored
She's got the
concubine,
time
and this
period
girl
too. Thank you
often
so
takes
much.
this ferry at this place called Tao Ye Du, Peach Leaf Ferry Crossing. And he wrote a series of poems describing their life. When the girl goes to the ferry point and comes back, and he always goes there to greet her. 但度无所苦. I hope your ferry crossing is smooth. There would be no difficulty.
I have to say, when you see like the characters, the Chinese characters, and even when she speaks it, it seems so minimal. And then when the translation of it, trying, I guess, for English speaking people to understand it, it becomes so extended. It's quite interesting, because I imagine trying to explain it, it's very hard to translate from one language to the next. So I really appreciate as well what she's trying to do here, from what she's saying as a translation to then what might be an actual direct translation. She puts both from what she's saying, but also what the wording is and the characters are.
Because it is a place where the water is quite turbulent. 我自迎接汝. I will come and greet you. So as you can tell, Wen Kexing just does not
That's
miss any
flirting.
opportunity to flirt. Then
Gotta give it
once
to
they
him.
get to the Mirror Lake Manor in the peach flower forest, they had this fight, and then he comes and starts to recite poetry to describe how beautiful Zhou Zishu's steps are. 飘飘兮
That's just him hitting
若
on
流
him.
风之回雪 仿佛兮若青云之蔽月. This is actually reversed order. In the actual poem, the second line comes first. This comes from a very famous long poem from the Three Kingdoms period, from Cao Zhi, the most talented son from Cao Cao. And he had this beautiful poem written, 洛神赋, one of the most famous literature pieces in Chinese history, and it is a long poem talking about the story of a mythical goddess, how beautiful she is in all kinds of
Well, he does
imaginable
mention
ways.
how
And these
Justalowly
two
is
lines,
very
飘飘
beautiful
兮
all the
若流
time.
风之回雪. 飘飘 means the floating state, the very light-weighted floating state. 若 means as, similar to. 流风之回雪, 流风 is the whirl of the wind, and 回雪 is the snow that turns in circles. So it's like your steps is so light-weighted and floaty.
Okay.
It's like the snow that's
Snow.
being blown by the wind and
Okay, that makes sense.
仿佛细若轻云之蔽月, as if light cloud covering the moon. He looks like a beggar, so like I doubt how much of 飘飘 and 轻云之蔽月 really is there. But Wen Kexing obviously has X-ray vision.
Yeah, he can see
looking
through it all.
the disguise and
He can see his beauty even through all of that.
Guy. Then afterwards, he immediately invited Zhou Zishu to drink with him, and Zhou Zishu refused. But at the time to invite Zhou Zishu, he used another line from
another one. Just remember that we're still on episode 2.
独酌无相亲. This comes from a very famous poem from Li Bai, the most famous Chinese poet, pretty much widely recognized. And this poem is in our textbook, so every educated Chinese person would remember this poem. It's describing him basically drinking alone at night under the moon, in an environment that has a lot of flowers. So it's pretty fitting for Wen Kexing to say that because they're in the forest of flowers. And 花间一壶酒 means a bottle of wine or liquor among the flowers. 独酌无相亲 means drinking alone without other people. And then the later part of the poem will keep talking about his sadness, his being lonely, his dancing in the moon. There's only the moon and his shadow that are his friend. So although it's not directly flirting, it's again
I would say this is flirting.
Reflecting of the environment they're in and suggesting, I don't want to drink on my own. At the end of this episode, they had this quick exchange of their martial arts in the temple. When they're fighting, you will see
I love when they fight.
Holding 2 sticks that have 2 flat bread going through them, and
someone told me about this.
And when they're fighting, she would kind of imitate the skills they have with those 2 flatbread hitting each other. This is a hidden reference that is not very well known. Most people would miss it, but then because one person digs it out, then the entire internet knows.
Yeah, that's how I know.
Bread in China is called 烧饼. 贴烧饼 means sticking. 烧饼. During Ming and Qing dynasty, it is a very colloquial slang that just means guy and guy. So
that's what
for
someone
the
told me.
international audiences who are still not aware of that, well, that is a very interesting
sexual reference.
In episode 4, when they're having that big fight with the beggars, before that, he said a line taken from very famous Chinese literature and historical writing. 其不闻青盖如故，白首如新. This is a very good line. You should remember it. This comes from 史记, records of grand historian, written by Sima Qian in Western Han Dynasty, the greatest monumental historian's record of Chinese history. And in one of its articles, there is a line which says, 有白头如新，青盖如故，白首如新 or 白头如新. Literally means white head as new. Very simple. But what it means is there are people who have lived together until their hair all grows white.
They're growing old
still
together.
as strangers. They don't really know each other. But there's also 青盖如故. 青 means tip something. 盖 is the cover. Here it means
when
the canopy
things
of horse-drawn carriage. 如故 is as old as you've known. But there are also people who only met very briefly as they pass each other when they are on 2 different cars and the canopy of the car touches. They are as if they've known each other forever. So it's describing the weirdness of human relationship. There are types of friendship that just builds up instantly.
And
so
some people that you know your whole life but you don't truly know.
We're pretty much 青盖, but we can be 如故. We can be actually soulmates. Master of flirting.
Yeah.
Also in that episode, you'll come across a very interesting line such as 烈女怕缠郎. This has become one of the most famous lines from the drama. 烈女 means the woman who cares about her reputation and chastity. But she cannot deal, or eventually she will yield to somebody who is
giving up your virginity.
Lang is a guy. Chan just means circle around or tie something around something. He also talks about 彻夜吹箫, right? The whole night blowing on the shell, and 丹田隐痛. 丹田 is the area that's below your belly button, and he's saying, I'm using my internal sort of the skill and force to help you throughout the night, and now I'm exhausted and then I've hurt myself. But you can totally misinterpret that line, blowing and this part of your belly. You know.
Yeah, we know.
Moving on to episode 5, you'll come across Wen Kexing doing something, a action reference to some homosexual content in China's history. Zhou Zishu's sleeve is
I've been told about this
by the
too.
blood of the dead body,
the cotton of
and
the
he
sleeve.
looks like he really doesn't like it. So Wen Kexing is like, let me help you. He cuts off his sleeve. The sleeve falls onto the ground. This is broken sleeve. 断袖. 断袖 in Chinese means homosexual. And the story behind it is very interesting. Back in Xihan, Western Han Dynasty, there's an emperor called Aidi. He has a 面首 or 男宠, which just means a male
mistress.
The guy
He has
is
a
named
male lover.
Dong Xian, and the emperor and Dong Xian often sleep together. The legend goes that one day, the emperor wakes up and he realizes his sleeve has been caught under the body of the lover. But if he pulls the sleeve, he would wake up the
lover.
guy. He just loves the guy too much.
So he cuts the sleeve.
He used a sword to cut off his sleeve so that he can pull himself free without waking up the guy. This story and this cutting off sleeve becomes a metaphor for homosexuality. Because this story is very well known.
She was very shy to say that word.
On screen, everybody's like, oh my god, broken sleeve, holy shit. I was very curious about how it got through censorship.
Yeah, I would like to know how it did, but it did.
Episode 6,
a few times.
They had the fight on the river, and finally Zhou Zishu loses his disguise. Zhou Zishu is getting away, and Wen Kexing said a line. 你要是走了千山暮雪 我孤影之影向谁去呀? This is a reference to a very famous poem that pretty much every Chinese person knows. It's written around Jing and Mongolian root time.
Okay.
And the poem is talking about the story of two wild swans, because swans are
tied with each other. And
if one
swans
dies, the other one wouldn't remarry.
there's a lot of homosexuality
symbol for
in a lot of animals.
Loyalty between lovers. And the poem is referring to one swan dies, the other swan is forever lonely. It's a very sad and very famous love poetry, and it's been widely used in all kinds of dramas and stuff. 神雕侠侣, for example, The Return of the Condor Hero, everybody who watches Chinese wuxia knows, and Li Mochou constantly recites this poem. So this is one line from that, which is 千山暮雪之影向谁去? After one swan dies, for the other swan, thousands of mountains, evening snow, so looking at that view, a lonely shadow, where should it fly to? It has no destination
no
anymore.
destination
well,
anymore.
Wen Kexing is basically saying, if you're gone, you know,
I have
what
nothing
am I
left
supposed to
to
do?
live
I'm
for.
the lonely swan that loses its partner. When that line came out, because how well known this poem is in China, everybody was like, holy moly, you guys are very, very daring. Then there are little funny references in episode 7 when they're in the restaurant. Wen Kexing tries to make Zhou Zishu to pay.
He does that a lot.
小二 And this person said, 客官谢谢 thank you, customer. 我去给你找零 I will go and find spare changes. And then Wen Kexing goes, you don't need to go and 找零 right? And the money is yours. So this guy is really happy. 找零 has double meaning. On the surface, it means go and find spare change. 找 is find, 零 is zero. In BL world, in Chinese language, 0 is the bottom and 1 is the top.
Oh, yeah,
so
yeah.
Wen Kexing
1 and
said,
0, yeah,
you
yeah,
don't
yeah.
need to go and 找零 for me. Pretty much as secretly saying, I've already found my 0.
So now we know who the top and who the bottom was.
Those 4 old people dancing and singing and playing music, and it becomes a symbol for the ideal retired life of theirs. They talked about the idea of 高山流水,知音难觅, which is very famous in Chinese culture. Tall mountain, flowing river. The person who understands your music is very hard to come across. It's based on a very famous story of 2 persons. I've mentioned it in my previous poetry videos. Yu Boya and Zhong Ziqi, a person who is master of qin playing and a person who is just a random peasant in the mountain. One day, he's playing, the guy walks by, and the guy actually understands all his music. Whatever he's trying to picture in his music, the mountain, the water, whatever, that guy understands. So they immediately becomes 知己. 知音, knowing the music, knowing myself. Well, the translation on YouTube goes for soulmate, which is good enough, but
is it
the actual meaning is the person who understands you.
See, that sounds better to say
completely.
that. This is the problem about subtitles.
It's just like the most rare thing that can happen to you, which is you find somebody in this world who fully understand who you really are. In episode 13, they had a drink together that ended up in the quarrel. Before that, though, Zhou Zishu referred to himself as somebody who should end up in the frying pan for like years, and Wen Kexing is like, well, I'll go in with you, right? We'll get fried together. And what they used as a reference is the most famous Chinese breakfast food, the Chinese version of fried donut, not sweetened. It's just 2 long stick, and it gets big when it gets fried, and it's called 油条. Legend has it, this food is invented during Nan Song, Southern Song dynasty, and it's after the death of the very famous patriotic general Yue Fei. He's wronged and then killed by, at the time, Prime Minister Qin Hui. And Qin Hui is a very infamous person in Chinese history. People of the time
Infamous,
hated this
remember
Prime
that
Minister
word.
so much. The Song Dynasty people invented the food 油条, which is 2 pieces of donut that's twisted together and then thrown into the oil to fry. It represents Qin Hui and his wife. Basically, Wen Kexing is saying we are tied together like the bad wives and husband in history. Get pride.
Right.
Now, to conclude today's video, we're gonna talk about episode 14. When the big revelation happened, Wen Kexing realized his hope is shattered. The person that he kind of wants to spend the rest of his life with is not gonna live very long. He's heartbroken, and it rained. When he was playing the Xiao on the bridge and Gu Xiang shows up, first he said something while he's sitting there. 风雨如晦，鸡鸣不已。
That was a sad moment.
This comes from 诗经, the classic of poetry, one of the oldest collections of poems in Chinese history. And this particular one has multiple interpretations. The surface meaning is 风雨如晦, wind and rain is dark, so it's a bad weather day. 鸡鸣不已, the rooster is crowing unstoppably. 既见君子, since I've met 君子, a gentleman, 云胡不喜? Why shouldn't I say I'm happy? It can be interpreted as a romantic poetry of a woman waiting for a man. It could also be used as a metaphor for within a very dark society when things are not going very well. When you meet a person with integrity, why shouldn't you be happy? So here for Wen Kexing, he used it probably because it is raining. It is a bad weather day. He's in the rain and feeling totally shattered. And 既见君子云胡不喜. 君子 clearly is Zhou Zishu. I've met this brilliant person. How can I say that I'm not happy? Well, I'm really unhappy because I know I'm gonna lose him very soon.
Which makes it more
this
poignant.
This is a very cleverly picked poem to help Wen Kexing express his feelings at the time. Then he stands up and he recites a poem. This poem is not from history. It's purely written by priests and then added a little bit more by the scriptwriter. So it's like the scriptwriter plus
the original
novel writer. 梁雨之秋，清无老死，一宿苦寒，戚薄亲. First half. 凉雨之秋, cool, rain, nose, autumn. So when the rain is cold, you know autumn, fall, the season of slow death has come.
It's become winter.
老死. The green parasol tree dies of old age. Parasol tree in Chinese literature either means somebody who has very high moral integrity, the gentleman, or it represents love. Till death do us apart kind of love. So you can interpret it as somebody of high value, high integrity, and the gentleman dies. So that's also referring to what he thinks of Zhou Zishu, but also a general sad atmosphere. 一宿苦寒戚薄亲. 一宿 means a whole night. 苦寒 means bitter, cold. 戚 attack. 薄 thin. 亲 is your quilt. A whole night of cold attacks the very thin bedding I have. It's a very common description in Chinese poetry, using
that makes sense.
Thin quilt to describe
loneliness.
Lonely and sadness. Then the second line, 世事蹉跎，死生契阔，相见恨晚，叹奈何。世事蹉跎. The things in this world are 蹉跎. 蹉跎 is an adjective describing the state of basically feeling you've wasted all your time and not really getting anywhere or doing anything. You feel no result is produced. The things in this world, all your endeavors often leads to nothing. You kind of have worked so hard for everything and then just doesn't end anywhere. 死生契阔 is a line also from 诗经. Also a poem that has multiple references. Some people like to use it to reference romantic love. Some people like to use it to reference the soldierly brotherhood between people who are on the battlefield.
I like how many meanings there are behind it.
死 death, 生 life. 契阔 means coming together and then breaking up. So life and death. Separation
together and then
in the
separation
original poem, the whole thing basically is 死生契阔，与子成说，执子之手，与子偕老, which means I promise you me and you promise me you, no matter it's life or death or separation or your
again, the soulmates
I'll always be with you. I'll hold your hand and grow old. So it just uses a quarter of that thing to represent the whole meaning here, which means I want to make that promise with you, life and death. But then 相见恨晚，叹奈何. 相见恨晚 is a very common idiom. Two people meet, but regret it was too late. That is what he thinks of their meeting. Had we met earlier, wouldn't that be great? 叹奈何, 叹 is exclaim. 奈何, if you've watched my stream earlier on, you know what it means. There's nothing you can do. It's that helpless state.
Which
so
makes sense for the scene.
we've met too late. What can I do? That is a totally made up poem from the scriptwriter plus the original
But
writer.
it's
And it's pretty
very
well written.
poignant.
It has a lot of reference to Chinese traditional history and symbolism and metaphor, and it's very fitting for Wen Kexing to say such a thing at the time. So that concludes episode 1 to episode 14. All the worth talking about literature references, things that's been very secretive or not so secretive about the flirtatious nature. As the story progresses, there are more literature references. Once
yeah, there's going to be a lot more because there's more episodes to look at as well.
I will do that. Thank you for watching Avenue X. I'll see you in my next video.
I think what fascinated me more was in the corner when she put the historical time periods of when this would have been referenced or when these people were alive or the dynasty times. Things like that have always been fascinating for me. I love history and the time period when something specific happened. So I was kind of looking at those moments and the people she was referencing from history, and then what obviously the idioms were and stuff like that. And it really does break it down because, again, it does get lost in translation. But I understand how hard it must be to describe something in English when there may be not references to it. So I really appreciate being able to understand more about the poetry. And as she says, there's quite a few that was taken very specifically from very historical, well-known Chinese history. So of course, if you speak the language, you understand it better and the meaning behind it. For me, I just really loved seeing the historical figures and the time period. I love knowing about that. So I really appreciated her breaking that down for us. Thank you for watching.